the channel, we're strutting and cutting our way into another edition of the Kyle Peterson Top 5. As today, we're counting down my top 5 favorite Brutus the Barber Beefcake figures.
The spirit of Ultimate Warrior will run forever!
Welcome everyone, Kyle here, and welcome back to the channel for another edition of the Kyle Peterson Top 5, a Thursday tradition here on the channel where we count down my top 5 or occasionally top 10 favorites of some kind of action figure toy line, wrestler in this case. And today, we're counting down my top 5 Brutus the Barber Beefcake figures of all time. And I know a lot of people absolutely hate Brutus the Barber Beefcake in this day and age. It's just wild to me because old young Kyle, and I'm sure a lot of you guys that are of similar age brackets to me, we loved Brutus Beefcake as a kid. We never thought he was going to be WWE champion, but we always thought he was right there in the mix for the Intercontinental title, basically his whole WWE run for the most part. And he was a big cool deal for me as a kid. He was one of my top favorites on the face side for the WWF. Just always thought he had a really cool gimmick. I loved the cutting of the hair, all that kind of fun stuff. The sleeper hold obviously was a great fit for a finisher for Brutus Beefcake. You know, he'd put him to sleep, then he'd cut their hair. It made all the sense in the world, a little Kyle. But a very, very underrated performer. I'm going to say yes, underrated. As a lot of people say, maybe overrated. I don't think he gets the due he was deserved. And you look back with the 2022 goggles, hey, maybe he wasn't the greatest wrestler in the ring, but man, he brought the show and he brought the haircuts. We all know that much. And maybe I'll visit Brutus the Barber Beefcake one of these days. We'll see what happens there. But of course, we do these top 5s, you guys know by now, hopefully, and if you don't, you should subscribe to the channel. You can see these every single Thursday on the channel. But we start at number 5, work our way to number 1. And of course, this is my list, and I'm asking for your list in the comments down below. And make sure you put them in order. That's the fun part here. And I gotta tell you, this is one of the harder lists. I was like, oh, 5 Brutus Beefcake figures. Yeah, I know what to do here. This is a heck of a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. And of course, childhood nostalgia plays a big factor into these for someone like me in my list. And it's maybe not the best figure ever as far as playability, but there's a lot of figures that were great for other reasons. And you'll have some of those on this list, of course. But a very difficult top 5. So let's get into it. Let's talk about it. Well, let's take a look at the top 5 Brutus Beefcake figures. All right, we kick off the top 5 Brutus Barber Beefcake figures of all time as voted by me, and we go to Mattel. We go to Elite WrestleMania Series 34 Brutus the Barber Beefcake, a sleeper Brutus the Barber Beefcake figure. Of course, his time teaming up with the Hulkster. We all know about the parasailing accident that happened in his career, so he's got a mask on here. That's always bonus points for me. You guys know I love face paint. I love masks. But I love the color and the different Brutus Beefcake. It's very different than the rest of the figures he's gotten throughout his career. This one always stood out. Always enjoyed this one. And you guys know my love of Rio, and that's basically just because I see her all the time at about every single store. This Brutus Beefcake was very similar to Rio back in the day in like 2018 or so when this came out. And up until last spring, about a year ago springtime, every time I journeyed up to Minneapolis for work, I'd always swing off into the Walmart in Faribault, Minnesota, and they had him on the pegs for an eternity. He was still there, and then like a lot of people, COVID got him. Somehow he was cleaned up out of the store, but I always visited my friend Brutus on my way to the Minneapolis Twin Cities up there. But a very, very cool one. Like I said, he's got the mask. He's got the hedge clippers. He's ready to go. He's got the red and yellow like a young Hulkster. I mean, he is the Hulkster disciple after all. No pun intended. But a very good one, a very underrated one, and probably still a cheaper figure to this day, as this never did set the world on fire, but always thought it was cool and it was so different. That's why it made my list at number 5. All right, we're at the number 4 spot in the Brutus Barber Beefcake countdown, and number 4 belongs to Hasbro. As we do know, there was 2 Hasbro Brutus Barber Beefcake figures. Which one made number 4? Well, we throw it all the way back to Hasbro Series 1 Brutus the Barber Beefcake. Obviously, that first series of Hasbro figures was quite the game changer. As a kid, I was very fortunate. I still feel that way. After all these years that I was a kid growing up in the playing days of LJN and Hasbro. And I'll never forget the first time seeing these Hasbro figures. Being a little bit like, oh no, my LJNs are going away. but then the excitement of a new toy line. And as you guys know, LJN's much bigger than the Hasbro's. It was quite the different feel, but man, it worked out. And for a lot of years, I was playing side by side. You know, today I'm going to play Hasbro's. Tomorrow I'm going to play LJN's. I did a lot of that kind of stuff. Obviously, I couldn't cross those over. I don't know if any of you maniacs out there could cross over. Did you ever have matches with your LJNs versus your Hasbro's? Man, you got to have a good imagination to do something like that, and I never did do that, but be interested to hear from one of you guys if you did. But this Brutus Beefcake, this is in the height of cutting and strutting mania with Brutus Beefcake. He was a big deal at the time. He warranted a spot in Series 1 for me. That being said, jumpers, never a fan of the jumpers in the Hasbro days. But this one worked for whatever reason, and I guess I'd say I looked past the jumper aspect on this one. You know, at the time, jumpers were brand new. Everything was brand new in the line. So maybe that's part of why I looked past it. But what I did love about this one was, obviously, the articulation, something we didn't have with LJNs. But you could put the patented Brutus Beefcake sleeper on other figures. I always thought that was really cool. Then, of course, the accessory of the scissors. That was a big deal as well. And I always loved the two fingers here for his strutting and cutting, but also the dangerous eye poke that he could do. But I also loved the head sculpt on this one. Even as a little kid, before I knew what it was, he's got the coked up head sculpt. He's been in the booger sugar. You can tell in the figure here. And it looks actually crazy. And I remember thinking, too, I used to have the Fright feature Ghostbuster figures back in the day, probably roughly around the same time. And, you know, with him being a jumper and his head going, this one always reminded me a little bit of the Peter Venkman Fright feature figure. Maybe I'm alone in that. I don't know. But very, very cool, very iconic outfit on Brutus. But, man, he's ready to party. You can tell by his eyes here. But, man, very, very iconic for me. Maybe not the best figure playability-wise, but when you didn't know any better at the time, this thing was all the rage for me, and that's why he comes in at number 4. All right, we're at the halfway point in our Brutus The Barber Beefcake countdown. Make sure you get your list together. Make sure you put it in the comments below, and don't cheat. Put it in order, number 5 all the way up to number 1. But now we're at number 3, like I said, and number 3, once again, we journey back to Mattel. We journey all the way back to Elite Series 49 for a more classic edition strutting and cutting Brutus the Barber Beefcake here. A very cool one, and much like the prior Mattel we talked about, right until about the start of COVID, I did have a local Walgreens that still had this Brutus Beefcake on the store pegs. It was always nice to visit old Brutus. But a very cool Brutus the Barber Beefcake, once again, from Mattel. This was his first Elite figure. We have had a few. We talked about one. There is, of course, the Legends one as well. Very, very cool looking Brutus. And one thing I really do like in the head sculpt for this Brutus that I thought was just I don't know if they did it on purpose. I'm going to assume they did. But the head on here looks a lot like the Brutus we just talked about from the old Hasbro. Even down to the old coked up eyes on here. I love the looks of this Brutus. I love the zebra. I love the jacket. There is a lot to love about this figure. A very, very cool Brutus Beefcake. A very underrated figure, I think, in the annals of Mattel Elite history. I think there's a lot of people that could justify this as the number 1 Mattel of all time. And who am I to doubt it? It's your list. So there you go. But Series 49, Brutus the Barber Beefcake, a slam dunk figure. That's why he comes in at number 3 on my top 5 list. Oh, baby, we're getting dangerously close to the end as we're at the number 2 spot in our Brutus the Barber Beefcake countdown. And this one, we go all the way back in the day. We go to Series 2. What is it? LJN Series 2. Yes, LJN, like we talked about earlier. Hasbro LJN, I grew up in the heyday playing with these guys. And Brutus Beefcake was one of probably the first 5 or 6 figures I probably got in my LJN days back in the day. And it was funny, when I started wrestling, he was just getting out of the Dream Team, Greg Valentine, getting to his own piece of the action. And I remember watching a lot of VHS tapes of his prior work, thinking, that's not the same Brutus Beefcake I know. Similar, but different, one might say. But this one, I probably, out of all the Brutus Beefcake figures I have in my collection, this is the one I spent the most time with. This is the one I played with the most by far. There's no doubt in my mind. I loved this figure as a kid. I don't know if it was the pants, the kind of vibrant, the pink and black attack, the shininess, and I always thought it looked really good like Brutus Beefcake back in the day. I can kind of see how people might not think it is, but it does look really good. I also love the arm pose. He had great playability features. Where some LJNs, not a lot of playability features. Always felt like Brutus had a lot to offer when you were playing as a kid. Just a fabulous figure, and like I said, you had to be there. If you were in the trenches, let's call it, playing with LJNs, collecting LJNs as a little kid, you loved this Brutus Beefcake. Where I can see some newer collectors the last couple of years, what is this dog toy? That's what I was here. This dog toy that's not articulated. I get all that, but you gotta take a step back. You gotta remember what we were used to back then. And I've always felt this one was special. It's so special, indeed, that he came in at number 2 in my top Brutus Beefcake figures of all time. All right, we are at the end. We are at the number 1 Brutus the Barber Beefcake figure of all time as voted by me. I'm going to remind you guys, put your list in the comments down below. And of course, if you like this video and other videos on the channel, you can get these much earlier as a Patreon member. Link in the description below. Bonus videos, exclusive videos, giveaways, and of course early access to videos, and best of all, you get to support content like this. So check out the Patreon down below. So we've come to the end here. We've come to the very end of our Brutus the Barber Beefcake countdown, and there is a lot of Brutus Beefcake figures. I could have almost probably done a top 10 list here, and this was very tough. There was 2 figures here that it was just very tough for me to leave off the list, but there could only be 5. I can't list more than that unless we're doing a top 10. I don't know if Brutus is top 10 worthy. He's close, but I don't know if he's worthy enough. But we're going to go for number 1. This one we're throwing all the way back to, once again, Hasbro. Yes, Hasbro. Series 3, Brutus the Barber Beefcake. Yes, maybe a bit of a dark horse call as my number 1 Brutus figure of all time. But when this one came out, of course, I enjoyed the prior Hasbro. You know I loved the LGN back in the day. But I felt like, oh, this is the evolution of Brutus Beefcake. I don't know if I knew the word evolution back then, but I felt like this one was going to a whole other level. My old Brutus Beefcake, he became just an unknown jobber that was at the beginning of the card for me, a guy that would lose all the time, and I did pretend he wasn't Brutus Beefcake. This became my Brutus Beefcake. Some interesting stuff, being a jumper, not a big fan of. But this Brutus, being a more open stance like this, of course the flat top cruncher or whatever the finisher move thing was called. Always love this. Great for clotheslines, great for punching action. Of course, we got the shears here. We got the wild zebra pants, much more wild than the first edition. Very, very cool. But then, once again, we got the exact same head we got. And it's funny, as a kid, you really don't notice little things like that. At least I did not. But this one just extra special in my playing days. I played with this one a whole lot, probably not for the length of time that I played with the Brutus LJN, but this one was special, and I remember the first time seeing this just thinking how big of a game changer this was going to be for me. And we probably, a lot of us as kids thought that when we get a Hasbro LJN, maybe it was a Titantron for you or whatever, but you said business is picking up in my Fig Fed. He's going straight to the moon. You know this Brutus Beefcake got the Intercontinental title, night 1, of course. But just a slam dunk figure, and a very underrated figure in the annals of Brutus Beefcake figures. Like I said, a lot of good figures left off my list that I really do like. That Jakks Deluxe Classic is a fabulous Beefcake figure. Some of the other good ones he's had, I mean, he's had more figures than I imagined, but the other good one is 2 versions, really. The Legends, I think it was Series 10, the Target exclusive, more of a Dream Team Beefcake. I really like those as well, but there can only be 5 on the list. And this one, the Series 3 Hasbro, came in at number 1. So just gonna let it settle in there, I guess. So remind you guys to put your list in the comments down below. Of course, follow along on social media, SirPaul64 on Twitter, Instagram, _Kyle_Peterson, ProWrestlingTees.com. Support the channel, pick up a t-shirt. And then, of course, this very channel on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you hit the notification bell. We got videos every single day. And then, of course, giving the old thumbs up always helps the channel. So there it is for the top 5 Brutus the Barber Beefcake figures of all time. I am Kyle, and I'll see you guys all real soon.